Hey guys, welcome to Finish Awesome Friday for another week. So this week we continue our discussion on the 3 layers of awesome, and this time is to do with training. So last week we covered the first layer, which is your energy pathways. So those are your phosphagen energy pathway, which is basically your short, explosive, power and strength based energy pathway. You then have your glycolytic, which is then basically the glycogen within the muscles, the sort of work that gives you that pump, that gives you that sort of hard lactic acid sort of burn. That is going to be your glycolytic sort of energy pathway. And then your oxidative pathway, which is then your longer based sort of longer duration endurance and conditioning based work that you can do from there. So once you understand what your dominance should be, then you can then move on to the next bracket, which is then how do you enhance that, or when should you basically, what should you manipulate within your training to get the effect you want. That comes into then the second layer, which is then today, which we're looking at intensity and volume, density and quality as well. So we'll cover all those areas and when and how you use those and progress those within your training. So starting off with intensity. So we're looking at intensity in terms of load, but obviously what most of you might understand intensity as is how hard you work. Though that is a level of intensity, it's not the level of intensity we look at in the strength and conditioning field. We look at in terms of the sports science terminology, which is the percentage of your 1 rep max. So when you're looking at your training, the closer it is to your 1 rep max, the more intense that work set is, the more intense that training is going to be. So that is how we look at intensity. An example, a quick progression. Obviously, there are many ways you can progress in all of these areas. I'm just giving you a quick, easy to digest example of it so you can see it in action. So this would be a quick and easy way to increase your intensity. So week 1, you're looking at doing 4 sets of 4 with 80%. And then week 2, you would increase the load up to 85% of your 1 rep max and do 5 sets of 3. So though the volume is pretty much the same, though this one's 16, this one's 15 reps you'll do total with the work set, the volume is pretty much kept consistent, but the intensity is increased, the amount of actual load on that bar, and that is basically to keep driving that adaptation, which is your obviously your strength adaptation, what you're looking for from there. So when would you use it? Why would you use intensity progressions? Well, you'd use it generally in phosphagen-based training, obviously. So when you're looking at strength and power, that is when you're going to utilize the progression, or this progression in particular, within your training. So, as I say, if you're looking to take your, maxes on your squat and your deadlift up, then you would look at a progression that was similar to that, where you'll drive intensity over time, okay, and try and build your intensity up. Next up, we look at volume. So when you think of volume, obviously in a very generic sense, you would think of in terms of volume, in terms of actually how loud something is. But obviously we're looking at it in a more scientific base, which is actually the amount of something. So the amount of work done is how we're looking at it within your training. So that is how we measure volume within the sort of strength and conditioning field. So once again, a very simple progression in terms of volume, but week 1, you'd be looking at 3 sets of 8 reps with 60% of your max. The intensity is not so important, it's just to illustrate a point from here. Week 2, you'd then look at week 2 being 4 sets of 8 repetitions and still being at 60%. So what that shows is from week 1 to week 2, what we've done is we've asked ourselves to do more work with the same level of intensity. Okay, so when you're looking to build adaptation within this from mechanical stress, then obviously that is what you'd be looking to do, a very simplified variation. When would you be looking to incorporate a progression within volume? Mostly when you're looking at structural changes. So when you want to build muscle, okay, this is the best progression to go by. Okay, quite simply, the more work you can get the muscle to do, the more muscle damage you can cause on that muscle, and then for the bigger it can become and the more volume it will build within that muscle. Okay, so when you're looking particularly at muscle building, or as I say, trying to build that level of intensity within that muscle, in terms of lactic acid burn and pump and all those good hormones, then volume is the one that you want to increase and try and build up from there. So you're mostly looking at the glycolytic energy pathway, as I say, muscle building. Lastly, we have density, or not lastly, but the third option, should I say, we have density. Okay, density is, the way we like to think about it is how dense something is. Okay, so how much mass is within a particular area. That's the more there is, the more dense that thing is. So that's a nice, simple way of thinking about it. In terms of strength and conditioning, in terms of training, there's 2 ways to record your density. Generally speaking, you can do more work in the same amount of time, or you can do the same amount of work in less time. Both will achieve the level of increasing density over time. So a quick, again, progression or route that you could take, you could do 3 sets of 8 repetitions in 5 minutes, and then the following week you'll try to do 3 sets of 8 repetitions in 4.5 minutes. What you've done there is you've shortened the amount of time, okay, that amount of density in which you're going to do the same amount of work. The other variation, quite simply, is to keep time consistent, okay, but to increase the volume. So first week you do 3 sets of 8, okay, in 5 minutes, and the next week you try and do 4 sets of 8 in 5 minutes. What you've done there is you've added more volume, added more work to the same amount of time, okay. So either one is a good adaptation of density work, and either can be manipulated for particular goals that you may have. When is it best to be used? Well, actually, this one could be used either within a glycolytic or an oxidative. You can even use it in a phosphagen, sort of setting, but the best adaptations for density come normally when you're using it within a glycolytic or an oxidative style training. So when you're looking at fat loss, for example, that would be a prime example of where this works. Or when you're looking at improving either anaerobic or aerobic capacity, so when you're doing, for example, bike sprints, or if you're trying to get your 10K down in time by 5 minutes, whatever, then density training will help build that particular process up from there. So you're trying to get more and more work done in the same amount of time. Let's just use a run, for example. Let's say you wanted to get your 5K under 30 minutes. Then what you do is you basically go out and run for 30 minutes, and each time you ran, you would try and get further and further until you reached your goal of 5K within that 30 minutes. And then that would build your density up over time. So that gives you a bit of an example of how you would incorporate that within your aerobic capacity. Okay, so there lies the best thing. But it's really good at fat loss. If your goal is fat loss, then improving your density over time is actually the best way to do it. Okay, and then finally, quality. Okay, quality is what we're looking at in terms of how you actually exercise. Okay, when you start a new exercise, when you train, obviously your level of skill, your level of technique is not going to be there. So when you look at quality, there's 2 particular ways you can really enhance the quality within your training. So the first one obviously is, as I just said, technique. So when you first start, for example, a squat, it doesn't look very good, it looks pretty ugly, you don't really know where you should be sitting, what muscles to fire at right times, and all those other aspects of training, okay? It's a learning process, okay? The neural aspect of the body, okay, all our cognitive functions and all the rest of it need to get used to that particular movement. So when you start, it looks pretty sloppy, but as you get more used to it, the quality of that increases. So what it would really be good for is if you stuck with the same weight. For example, say you were doing a 40 kilo back squat. When you start, it looks really ugly, but over time, if you over weeks you just keep practicing it, then obviously you'll get better at that particular movement, and thus will improve the quality of the rep, which means then later on when you start adding intensity to it again, or volume or whatever, then the quality is always there. You know the particular techniques you need to use. The other terms of quality is actually in terms of muscle recruitment, so actually feeling the muscle work. So once again, when you start, it's very difficult to know exactly what you should be feeling, exactly what muscles should be firing, where you should put the tension within that movement. Okay, so we can use something simple as, for example, a bicep curl. Though most people understand the idea of doing a bicep curl, the actual concentration, the peak contraction, and all the other things from there that you start learning more and more about as you get used to the movement means that you're recruiting the muscle fibers better. And if you do it in a particular way that fires more sort of motor units, with sort of the fibers within the muscle, you get better and better at recruiting that muscle and using it within your training. So for example, when you start, obviously you don't have much muscle mass because you haven't recruited your muscle fibers and got them to grow, asked them to adapt. As you get better, obviously you get jacked and tanned. So that's basically the way you need to look at it. So quality can be broken down into those 2 aspects: either a neural adaptation, where you're getting better technique, better movement, and better recruitment of your nervous system, and then in terms of a muscle recruitment, in terms of actually building that muscle and getting the stimulus within the muscle to grow. Okay, so that's the way you're looking at quality. So hopefully you'll go through from there. When is quality best to use? Okay, all the time really. You want to make sure that when you start a new exercise or when you're training, that your quality, your technique continuously improves. To do that, I suggest utilizing warm-up sets and obviously continued sort of movement patterns that are fairly similar to allow yourself to adopt a proper technique within that movement. But especially in beginners, it's massively important to ensure that before you add load, before you make them do weights that are out of their zone, that they are able to perform good technique at lower intensities first. Okay, obviously as you get closer and closer to your 1 rep max, as you get closer to your maximum reps, the form can sometimes go out the window slightly, and that is to be expected, and though it shouldn't be encouraged, it will happen. So you've got to try and just do the best you can with heavier loads, But always practice that quality, always try and get better at lower intensities to try and help drive that adaptation, so that when you get to heavier weights, you know, that motor pattern is built in. And unfortunately with the heavier load, it's going to take you off a little bit, but trying to fight it and keep within that proper technique and how you should be lifting is always the important thing to do. Okay guys, so that is the second layer of awesome. So next week we will start discussing the final layer of awesome, which is then your accessories, how to use them, when to use them, what different styles there are to use, and basically how to kind of give that cherry on the top in terms of your training. Okay guys, hope you enjoyed that. Any questions, obviously throw them in below, email them over. Obviously my goal is to try and give you guys as much information as I can, so any questions you have or any topics that you'd like me to cover in the future, obviously let us know. Just be awesome, have a great weekend guys, and I'll see you next week. Catch you later.